Life has a way of challenging us, testing our limits, and forcing us to confront the truths we often try to avoid. In today's story, we follow Sarah, a successful museum curator who, despite her achievements, finds herself grappling with painful family dynamics and a sister's betrayal. Through a journey of self-discovery and emotional healing, Sarah learns that true strength lies not in perfection or approval, but in accepting and embracing who we truly are. Join us today as we delve into this heartfelt story of family, love, and the lessons life has to offer. Be sure to subscribe to Life Stories to start today's journey. As I stood at the Grand Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the final glimmers of daylight were fading into the evening twilight. The gala weekend had arrived, and with it, the culmination of 3 years of hard work, the exhibition I had curated. A dialogue between the ancient and the modern had finally opened. A rush of excitement swept through me as prominent figures from the art world approached one by one, offering their congratulations. The success of the exhibition was undeniable, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of accomplishment that could not be denied. I had worked so hard to build my career. It hadn't been easy. Museum curation had never been an easy path, especially for someone like me. I had spent years refining my vision, taking painstaking care to understand the intersection of history and art, seeking the connections that could bridge centuries. My passion had been clear from the start, but my success hadn't come overnight. I had dedicated myself fully to my work, sometimes at the expense of other parts of my life. My colleague Jennifer, holding a glass of champagne in one hand, approached me with a bright smile. "Liz, this is marvelous. This exhibition will be the highlight of the year," she said, her voice filled with admiration. I smiled back, my eyes twinkling with pride. "Thank you, Jennifer. It's been a long journey. This project has been 3 years in the making," I replied, my voice soft, but steady. I felt proud, but there was a part of me that couldn't shake a lingering discomfort. Jennifer hesitated for a moment before asking, "By the way, when is your sister's wedding? I know it's coming up soon, isn't it?" I felt my expression cloud briefly, the emotions swirling within me like a storm I wasn't prepared to confront. "Next month," I answered briefly, almost mechanically, before I quickly changed the subject. The truth was, I didn't know when my sister's wedding was. I hadn't been invited, and as much as I tried to suppress it, a small ache settled in my chest as I thought of that reality. The relationship between my sister Brittany and me had always been complicated. We were so different, the contrast stark in ways that had always bothered me. Brittany was everything I wasn't: sociable, outgoing, and the center of attention in any room. Her career as a real estate agent was just as flashy as her personality. Specializing in Manhattan's prime properties, she thrived in the world of people, and people adored her for it. I, on the other hand, had always preferred solitude. I found my peace in deep conversations about art and history, in the quiet moments that allowed me to think, to reflect. While Brittany had an army of friends and admirers, I often found myself more content in the solitude of my study or the museum's quiet halls. We were worlds apart in so many ways, and our relationship had always been shaped by that difference. Our parents, Margaret and Harold, had their own way of viewing us. They lived a comfortable, retired life in a charming neighborhood in Connecticut, where Harold had made his fortune in investment banking and Margaret had earned a reputation as a leading figure in local charity circles. To anyone who looked at our family, we seemed perfect. Our pictures hung proudly in their home, perfect smiles, well-dressed children, the image of a family that had it all. But underneath those smiles was something more complicated. Growing up, it had always been Brittany who was the special one. My parents' protective instincts had always kicked in when it came to her. They showered her with affection, perhaps because of her vulnerability, or perhaps because of the image they had built around her. Meanwhile, I was labeled the independent one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need as much care or attention. "Liz is smart, she'll be fine," my mother would often say. But with Brittany, every small accomplishment, every step forward, was celebrated with fanfare. I had to work harder to earn their recognition. Even when I was awarded honors in school. When I was promoted to curator at the museum. There was no real excitement. My success had always been expected. There was no party, no fanfare. My parents seemed resigned to the idea that I was fine. That I didn't need the same kind of emotional support Brittany did. My love life was no different. As a young woman, I had always been focused on my studies and my career. And I dated, but I never found someone who truly understood me. My parents, however, pretended to be concerned about my single status. Yet deep down, they seemed to have accepted that I wasn't the type to settle down. Brittany's romantic life, on the other hand, was a constant topic of conversation. Every breakup was met with comforting words and financial support. I had never received that kind of attention. Even though I too struggled with the intricacies of love. When Brittany got engaged 7 months ago, I had been happy for her, despite the odd sense of discomfort that settled in my chest when I met her fiancé. Jason Foster. Jason was everything Brittany wanted in a man: sociable, charming, successful in his own right as an investment banker. Yet, there was something about him that unsettled me. The way he spoke, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, it all felt calculated. I couldn't place it at the time, but I knew something wasn't quite right. I told myself to push that feeling aside. If Brittany was happy, that was all that mattered. Or so I thought. That night, as the gala came to a close and I checked my phone, I found no congratulatory messages from my family. Not from Brittany, not from my parents, just silence. It wasn't the first time. But tonight felt different. I had just achieved something monumental in my career. Yet I was alone in that moment. As I sipped the last of my champagne, I prepared to return to my daily routine. To the emptiness that had begun to feel all too familiar. A week passed since the exhibition's grand opening, and I found myself, once again, lost in the quiet of my apartment. It was Thursday evening, and I sat comfortably on the couch, a glass of red wine in hand. I scrolled absent-mindedly through Instagram, not expecting anything of particular importance. Just the mindless distraction that social media often provides. Then, my finger stopped as I scrolled past a post from my friend Sophia. It was a photo from Brittany's wedding. I froze. There they were, Brittany and Jason, standing in front of a grand church, surrounded by white flowers and sparkling champagne towers. The photo radiated happiness, the kind of image you'd see in a bridal magazine. My heart pounded in my chest, and confusion clouded my mind. The photo had been posted last Saturday, the very day I had been busy with my exhibition. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Brittany had gotten married. And I hadn't been invited. I stared at the picture, trying to find any logical explanation for why I wasn't there. But nothing came to mind. The invitation must have gotten lost in the mail. I thought, maybe they didn't have my new address. But I had been living in the same apartment for years. And my parents knew it. They knew exactly where I lived. I quickly clicked through more photos from the wedding, shots of the venue. The lavish decorations, the cake, the guests dancing, and, unmistakably, my parents. They were smiling, their faces alight with joy, their eyes shining with pride. But there was no sign of me. No photo of me standing next to them. No acknowledgement that I was even part of this event. They had all been there. They had all celebrated Brittany's day. But I had been completely erased from it. I felt a cold emptiness spread through me. Why hadn't they invited me? What had I done to deserve being excluded from something so significant? The more I thought about it, the more the weight of it all pressed down on me. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. I waited, listening to the dial tone. The call rang on, but there was no answer. I tried my father's number, but the result was the same. No response. And then, I called Brittany, again, voicemail. It wasn't like them. I had just spent years building something important to me. Something I was proud of. And yet none of them had reached out to congratulate me. No, well done, for the exhibition. No recognition of the hard work I'd put in. I wasn't even included in the celebration of Brittany's wedding. My heart sank, and I felt a pit form in my stomach. Was this what my family thought of me? That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being left out, of being invisible. I tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. The thought of Brittany and Jason's wedding kept returning to my mind, and I knew I couldn't let it go unanswered. I decided then and there that I would go to Connecticut, to my parents' house. I needed to hear it from them. I needed to understand why they had chosen to exclude me from their lives so completely. By Friday evening, I had made up my mind. I took the time off work and set out by car, the long road ahead giving me plenty of time to think about what I might say when I arrived. Would I confront them? Would I demand answers? Or would I simply listen to whatever excuse they had for their behavior? It was hard to know. But I was determined to find out what had happened to the family I once felt I was a part of. As I drove toward the house, memories of my childhood flooded back. The large white house on the corner of the quiet, tree-lined street, where my parents had always seemed so perfect. It was still just as I remembered, standing tall and pristine, but something inside me had changed, and I felt an unease settle over me as I parked in front of the house. I stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Before I walked up to the door, I was determined. I had to know. But what would I find on the other side? I arrived at my parents' house just after 7 p.m. The familiar white 3-story house stood exactly as it always had. A monument to the quiet suburban life they had built. But something felt different tonight. Something I couldn't quite put into words. The house was unchanged on the outside. But as soon as I stepped through the door, it was as though a new layer had been added to the place, one that weighed heavily on me. I had expected to find comfort, some sense of familiarity, but as I entered, a large wedding photo caught my eye. Hanging in the entryway, it was of Brittany and Jason standing before the altar, looking radiant and blissfully happy. My parents stood beside them, beaming with pride, but the absence of my presence in the photo was like a cruel reminder of my exclusion. I wasn't just absent from the wedding, I was absent from their lives in that moment. Completely erased from the image they had chosen to frame and hang on the wall. As I stood there, staring at the photo, my mother, Margaret, appeared from the living room, her face showing surprise at seeing me unexpectedly. "What brings you here?" she asked, her voice betraying just the slightest hint of irritation. "You should have called ahead." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. I had prepared for this moment. But seeing them, hearing her voice, brought all the raw emotions I had tried to suppress to the surface. "It seems Brittany's wedding took place," I said, my voice steady but carrying an edge. "Why wasn't I informed?" There was a brief, uncomfortable silence. Margaret's face momentarily went blank, and she seemed to shrink under the weight of my question. Then, with a shrug, she said, "Oh, that was just a change of plans. We had to move it up suddenly because of Jason's schedule. We wanted to let you know. But weren't you busy, as usual?" Her words stung. It was as if she was brushing me off, dismissing my feelings in favor of their own convenience. "That's a lie," I said firmly, my voice trembling slightly. "You knew about my exhibition long in advance. You knew when it was. And yet I wasn't even invited to Brittany's wedding." "Why?" Before Margaret could respond, my father, Harold, walked into the room, looking just as confused as Margaret. "Elizabeth," he said, his tone casual, "what brings you here so suddenly?" I stared at him, my frustration growing. "Dad, why wasn't I invited to Brittany's wedding?" I asked again, my voice firm now. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let them avoid the question this time. A thick silence fell between us. My parents exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Margaret sighed. "I'll be honest," she said, her voice cold and unfeeling. "As a single woman, it didn't concern you, did it? We didn't invite you because it would have been embarrassing." I stood frozen in place, my mind struggling to process the hurtful words. Embarrassing? What could possibly be embarrassing about me being there? Was my existence a burden to them? Margaret continued, her words sharp. "It was Brittany's special day. Jason's family and friends are all wonderful people, successful, respectable. Everyone was expected to come as couples. And having you sit there alone, focused on your career, it would have made everyone uncomfortable. Her words sliced through me like a knife. Was this how they saw me? Was my career, my independence, such a source of shame for them? So, what you're saying is that my independence and my life are an embarrassment to you? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Don't worry about it, Harold interjected, his tone dismissive. A wedding is just a ceremony. You weren't invited, but what difference does it make? Your life hasn't changed. You still have your work and your life as always. The indifference in his voice was like a slap to my face. I had worked so hard to be proud of who I was. And yet, to them, it meant nothing. It wasn't important. I was no longer their child. I wasn't part of their world. As I stood there, staring at the two people who had always been my parents, something inside me broke. It wasn't the anger that hurt the most. It was the profound sadness of realizing that I would never truly be accepted by them for who I was. Martha's voice interrupted my thoughts. Don't be so sensitive, Liz, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Brittany's always needed special attention. You've always been strong and independent. I'm surprised you're upset over something so small. Something small. My whole life, my worth had been reduced to something small. Being excluded from my family's most important moments. Having my existence erased from their celebrations. It wasn't small. It was everything. Something small? I repeated, my voice calm but heavy with anger. Is being excluded from my own family something small? Is having my existence denied really that insignificant? Margaret sighed again, clearly irritated. The wedding was perfect. It cost over $50, but it was worth every penny. As I stood there, the weight of my parents' words suffocating me, I walked toward the door. The cold air outside felt like a relief, washing over me as I stepped away from the house. But inside, something had been irrevocably shattered. I had seen my family for what it truly was, loveless, indifferent, and unable to accept me as I was. Back in my apartment, I looked once again at the Instagram photos from Brittany's wedding. I cried, feeling the deep sadness and anger mixing within me. But amidst the tears, a thought began to form. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was stronger than this. And I would find a way to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my place in the world. Months passed, and life slowly began to heal. Sarah's resolve had strengthened in ways she never imagined. The painful truth about her family's indifference was still fresh. But she had started to rebuild, not just her career, but her sense of self. The false expectations that had once tied her down, that had made her feel small and unimportant, no longer held any power over her. She saw Brittany again, their conversations now tinged with a quiet understanding. Brittany had gone through her own painful journey, and although their relationship would never be the same, they began to rebuild the sisterly bond that had once seemed so far out of reach. It was hard, but there was a new, softer empathy between them, a shared experience of betrayal and loss that had somehow brought them closer. As for her parents, Margaret and Harold, their relationship with Sarah had started to change. They came to understand that their expectations had been unfair and that their blind adoration for Brittany had hurt Sarah more than they realized. Over time, they apologized, not just with words but with actions. Slowly, their family began to heal. Not through grand gestures, but through small, genuine moments of understanding. And then, in the middle of all this, Sarah met David, a quiet man who understood her deeply, who admired her work and her independence. They didn't rush. There was no pressure, no unrealistic expectations. They simply enjoyed each other's company. And Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, true connection. Not based on achievement or perfection, but on who she really was. As Sarah stood in her parents' backyard one spring afternoon, surrounded by blooming flowers, she realized something profound. Life had a way of breaking us, only to allow us to rebuild stronger, more whole. The true family bonds she had always longed for were now real. Built on honesty, empathy, and a deep love that could withstand anything. To follow more stories like this, be sure to subscribe to Life Stories for more insightful videos about the journeys we all experience.